At 90 years old, sitting on my porch looking out at a dairy empire built by these very hands, I still cannot forget the taste of the milk that was once the beginning of my hell. It is a memory etched deeper than the wrinkles on these gnarled hands. A pitch-black night in a stinking barn that forever changed the life of a 15-year-old orphan girl. They called him the pride of the town, the future doctor. As for me, I was just a hired girl nobody would believe. What they didn't know is that justice doesn't always come from prayer. Sometimes it must be seized through a lifetime of indignation and struggle. This journey from ashes to the summit is a long story of revenge and justice, reclaimed with both sweat and tears. My story holds it all: pain, humiliation, and in the end, victory. If you are listening to this story, no matter where you are in the world, please subscribe and comment to let me know where you're listening from. Because some stories, no matter how painful, still need to be told. I was born in 1935 in a town so small it didn't even appear on the map, near Waco. It was a difficult time of harsh droughts and endless poverty. My mother washed clothes for the rich folks in town, the kind whose hands were so smooth they looked like a baby's skin. Her hands were the opposite: cracked, red, full of calluses and bulging veins. My father worked in the fields, moving from farm to farm depending on the season. He was away more than he was home. At our house, hunger was a constant visitor. It sat at the table with us every day. From a very young age, I knew what it was to work. At 6, I was already helping my mother wring out clothes, hang them on the line, and deliver them to the houses. By 8, I knew how to do a little bit of everything: cook, clean, take care of the animals. It was around that time I learned to handle cows. A neighbor had 2 skinny ones that still gave milk, and I would help with the milking in exchange for a mug of milk every now and then. It was a celebration when I came home with that still warm milk. I'd divide it into equal parts with my 3 younger siblings. We drank it slowly, feeling every drop go down our throats, the sweet, creamy taste that was a rarity at our table. It was also at the age of 8 that I lost my father. An accident at the mill. They said he fell into a grinding machine. In an instant, he became pulp, just like the crops he harvested. There was no open casket funeral, nothing. Just the news brought by a coworker and my mother, sobbing her heart out, leaning against the clapboard wall of our house. After that, she was never the same. She had to work for 2 now, and we only saw her leaving before the sun came up and returning after it had set. It wasn't long before my mother started getting sick. First, it was a cough that wouldn't go away, then a fever that came and went. Then she became weak, so skinny it was pitiful. Even so, she kept working. "As long as there's strength in my arms, there's food on the table," she'd say. But every day, I saw the strength leaving her arms. At 10, I had already taken over most of the housework. By 12, I was doing practically everything: washing, ironing, cooking, taking care of my siblings. It was during that time that I lost 2 of my younger siblings. First was Joaquin, from a high fever that no tea could bring down. Then it was Maria, from diarrhea that dried her out like a plant without water. All that was left was the youngest, Tony, who was sick more often than not. Back then, doctors were for the rich. Poor folks made do with faith healers, folk remedies, and herbs from the fields. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. In our case, it was more often didn't. When I turned 14, my mother finally lay down and never got up again. She wasted away from an illness nobody really knew what it was. Today, with the little I've learned since, I suspect it was tuberculosis. She died with her head in my lap, apologizing for leaving me alone in this world. "Take care of Tony," was the last thing she said before she let out that long sigh you know is the last. After my mother's funeral, I was lost. There was no way to support myself and Tony on the little I earned washing clothes. That's when my Aunt Clara showed up, my mother's sister who lived in the city and worked as a cook in the house of a wealthy family. She said she couldn't take both of us, but she managed to find a place for Tony with some relatives of hers in Corsicana. For me, she found a job in the kitchen of the Davenport Ranch, owned by Mr. Jeremiah Davenport, one of the richest and most powerful men in the region. "This is your chance to have a roof over your head and food in your belly," my aunt said. Mr. Davenport pays little, but at least you'll have a place to sleep and something to eat. Better than starving on the street. And so, with a heavy heart from leaving my little brother, I packed my few belongings and went to work on the Davenport ranch. At the time, I thought it was a blessing. Little did I know I was walking straight into the lion's den. I'll never forget the first time I saw the Davenport ranch. The main house looked like a palace to me, who had never seen anything bigger than the little church in my village. It was an old building, from the time of the great cattle drives, with a wide porch in the front, large ornate wooden windows, and red clay tiles on the roof. Around it was a garden with plants I'd never seen, so well kept it looked like something out of a magazine. Behind the house, the pastures and fields stretched as far as the eye could see. "Is all this Mr. Davenport's?" I asked Aunt Clara. "All this and much more," she replied, "so keep your head down and your mouth shut." I soon learned how life worked there. I woke up at 4 in the morning, when it was still dark, to light the wood stove and have coffee ready before the other employees woke up. Then it was cleaning, scrubbing, ironing, helping in the kitchen, and whatever else I was told to do. I only went to sleep after 10 at night, when the family had already had dinner and everything was tidied up to start all over again the next day. My hands, which were already calloused from so much work, got even worse, cracked to the point of bleeding from scrubbing floors and clothes. On the ranch, everyone knew their place. At the top of everything was Mr. Jeremiah Davenport, a tall man with a thick mustache and a gaze that seemed to pierce right through you. His wife, Mrs. Eulalia, was a thin woman with a pinched nose who spoke little but observed everything. Then came the children, the eldest, Eleonora, who was already married and lived in Dallas, the middle one, Beau, who was studying medicine in the capital and came home for the holidays, and the youngest, Clarice, who was at a Catholic boarding school in Houston. Below the family came the foreman, then the house staff, and finally the field hands. It was like a ladder where each rung knew it couldn't climb to the one above. And me? I was on the lowest rung inside the house, the new girl who did everything nobody else wanted to do. The food I ate was what was left after everyone had served themselves. The room I slept in was a tiny little room in the back that I shared with 2 other maids. The clothes I wore were old, patched-up things that Mrs. Eulalia didn't want anymore. Aunt Clara came to visit me from time to time. In the beginning, she brought news of Tony, saying he was fine, growing up strong, but over time, the visits became rarer. Later, I learned that Mr. Davenport didn't like his employees receiving visitors. He thought it interfered with the work, and nobody dared to displease him. It was in the summer of 1950 that everything started to change. Beau Davenport came back from the capital for the holidays. He was 25 years old, almost finished with his medical degree, and was treated on the ranch as if he were a king. Everyone spoke of him with admiration. Dr. Beau, the family's doctor, Mr. Davenport's pride. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark, well-groomed hair, always impeccably dressed even in the heat of the ranch. The local girls would sigh when he rode by on his horse through town. In the first few days, I barely noticed that he looked at me differently than the other maids. I was too busy scrubbing, cleaning, running from one side to the other. But Miss Clementine, the oldest cook, noticed. "Be careful with the doctor," she told me one night while we were washing the dinner dishes. "He has a wandering eye for the young girls. He's already taken 2 from here to the barn before." I didn't quite understand what she meant. In my innocence, I thought it was some extra work he asked the maids to do. It was then that the strange order came. Mrs. Eulalia called me one afternoon and said that from that day on, I would be responsible for getting fresh milk from the barn every morning before lighting the stove. "Dr. Beau likes his milk fresh from the cow for breakfast," she explained. "You'll have to wake up half an hour earlier." As if I didn't already wake up early enough. The first morning, I went out at dawn, still dark, to the barn. I was scared of the nighttime creatures, of the ghosts people said roamed the ranch. I carried a small lantern that barely lit the path. When I got to the barn, I was startled to see I wasn't alone. Dr. Beau was there, leaning against a pile of hay, smoking a cigarette. "I thought you might get lost on the way," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I came to show you which cow has the sweetest milk." That morning, nothing happened beyond him showing me how to milk the cow the way he liked. But I felt a chill in my stomach when he got too close, his hot breath smelling of cigarettes on my neck as his hands guided mine on the cow's udder. "You have to be gentle but firm," he explained, squeezing my fingers with unnecessary force, "just like you treat a woman." The next night, I had a strange dream. I was in the corral and saw a calf being branded with a hot iron, but when I looked closer, it wasn't a calf, it was me. And the one holding the red-hot iron was Dr. Bo, with that same cold smile on his lips. I woke up sweating, my heart beating like a revival tent drum. Something inside me already knew what was coming, even if my innocent mind didn't yet understand. In the following mornings, he continued to happen to be in the barn. Each time he got closer, touched more, said things that made me uncomfortable. I, raised to always respect my employers, didn't know how to react. I would lower my head, answer, "Yes, sir," and try to finish my work as quickly as possible. Until that morning came. The morning that divided my life into two parts, the before and the after. I had gone to the barn earlier than usual, hoping to avoid him. The sky was still dark, not a sign of the sun wanting to rise. The smell of hay mixed with the sweetish odor of fresh milk filled the air. The cows breathed heavily in the dark, releasing that warm breath that formed little clouds in the cold morning air. I was finishing milking the second cow when I heard his footsteps. Different from the other times, he said nothing. He just closed the barn door, locking it with a piece of wood. The sharp sound of the bolt sent a shiver up my spine. I kept my back to him, pretending not to notice, my hands trembling on the cow's udder. "Finished with the milk?" he asked, his voice different than I knew it, huskier, lower. "Yes, sir," I replied without turning around. That's when I felt his hand on my waist, turning me to face him. "You know what they say about milk, girl?" he asked, his face so close I could smell the whiskey on his breath. "That it makes you grow strong." Before I could answer, he pushed me against the wooden wall. "But there's a stronger kind of milk." I tried to break free, but he was too big, too strong. It felt like he weighed a ton on top of me. "Please, Dr. Bo, let me go," I begged, the tears already flowing uncontrollably. He just laughed, that laugh that still appears in my nightmares. "You'll go, but first, you're going to drink your milk." What he did to me that morning, I can't describe in full detail. I was so innocent I didn't even really know what was happening. I just knew that it hurt, that I felt dirty, torn apart inside. While he violated me, he whispered those disgusting things about hot milk and how it would make me grow. When he finished, he threw my torn dress on the floor. "This is our secret," he said, adjusting his clothes. "If you tell anyone, no one will believe you, and your job is the only thing separating you from begging. Think about it." I left the barn that morning feeling like a rag. My legs could barely support me. I felt a hot, sticky liquid running down my thighs. I hid in the pantry, washed myself as best I could with cold water, and bit my arm to keep from screaming in pain. When I showed up in the kitchen late, Mrs. Eulalia slapped me across the face in front of everyone. "Lazy girl!" Dr. Bo was waiting for his fresh milk. The cruel irony of her words burned hotter than the slap. I thought it was just that one time, that he would get tired, find someone else to torment. But I was wrong. It became a macabre routine. 3 times a week, he waited for me in the barn before dawn. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. On the other days, he stayed in bed later, and I thanked God for that rest. I tried everything to escape. I pretended to be sick once. The result: he showed up in my little room at night, saying that as an almost doctor, he came to examine me. It was worse than in the barn, with the other maids sleeping nearby, having to bite the pillow to not make a sound. I tried waking up later, but Mrs. Eulalia caught me and gave me a beating with a hickory switch. "Are you trying to lose your job? There are 10 in line who want your place." I even tried to run away one night, but where would I go? I had no money, no one, and I was afraid of what they might do to my little brother Tony if I disappeared. It was like being trapped in a cage with no way out. For resisting, I got punished. Extra, disgusting tasks like cleaning the toilet, dealing with the mistress's menstrual rags, carrying heavy buckets from one side to the other. When I dropped something due to exhaustion, I was humiliated in front of the others. "This one isn't even good enough to clean a pigsty," Mrs. Eulalia would say. If only she knew what her precious son was forcing me to do. As the weeks went by, I began to waste away. I couldn't eat. Just the thought of food made my stomach turn. I lost so much weight that my already loose clothes looked like empty sacks on me. I had dark circles under my eyes as if I had been punched. My hands trembled all the time. I dropped things without meaning to. At night, I couldn't sleep properly. I had nightmares, woke up sweating, biting my hand to keep from screaming. The other maids started to distance themselves as if I had some contagious disease. Only Miss Clementine, the oldest cook, looked at me with pity in her eyes, but she didn't say anything either. It was about 2 months later that the worst happened. I started feeling nauseous every morning. At first, I thought it was because of the situation, the constant fear, the lack of food. But even on the days I managed to eat something, my stomach would throw it all back up. Sometimes the smell of food in the kitchen was so unbearable I had to run out to vomit in secret. One day, Miss Clementine called me behind the kitchen. She was a woman of about 60 who had been on the ranch since she could remember. She had raised Dr. Beau, fed him from a spoon when he was little. Maybe that's why he had a certain respect for her, the only human being in that house he treated with some consideration. "Child," she said, looking me in the eyes, "how long has it been since your moon time came?" It was like being slapped. I hadn't even realized it was already almost 2 months late. With everything that was happening, I wasn't paying attention. "I don't know, Miss Clementine," I replied, trembling. "I think it's been a while." She closed her eyes, sighing deeply. It was the doctor, wasn't it? I couldn't answer. I just broke down, crying in her arms, my whole body shaking. She held me tight, like my mother used to do when I was little. "Hush, child, don't cry. We'll find a way." The terror I felt upon understanding I was carrying that man's child is impossible to explain with words. It was as if a monster was growing inside me, sucking the life out of me, reminding me every day of the horror in the barn. That night, I didn't sleep a second. I kept imagining what would become of me, a 15-year-old girl with no family, carrying the bastard child of her employer's son. There was no way out. Miss Clementine tried to help me in her own way. She gave me a strong pennyroyal tea that made me sick for 3 days, with pain so bad I thought I was going to die. But the baby held on. She also tried with boiled bitter herbs, a remedy so bitter I could barely swallow it. Nothing worked. It seemed that child was determined to come into the world, no matter how much I didn't want it to. Meanwhile, I still had to go to the barn on the scheduled days. He didn't know about the pregnancy yet, or pretended not to notice. But every time he touched me, I felt such disgust that I had to concentrate not to vomit right there. I prayed to every saint in heaven that he wouldn't notice my belly, which was starting to show slightly. I started wearing looser clothes, tying a cloth around my waist to hide it. It worked for a while. The other maids commented that I was sick, too thin, yellow as a candle. No one suspected, or if they did, they pretended not to see. A maid's problem is nobody's problem. Until the fateful day arrived. It was a Friday, and as usual, I went to the barn before dawn. He was already there, waiting for me with that disgusting little smile. This time, when he grabbed me, he ran his hand over my stomach and suddenly stopped. I felt the blood freeze in my veins. He pushed me against the wall, lifted my blouse by force, and saw the small protrusion that not even all the tied cloth could hide anymore. "What is this?" he asked, his voice cold as ice. "You're pregnant?" I couldn't answer, the words stuck in my throat by fear. He shook me hard, banging my head against the wood. "Answer me, you bitch! Are you carrying a child?" I nodded my head, tears streaming down my face. "And you're saying it's mine?" He laughed, a joyless laugh. "Who's to say you haven't been sleeping around with the ranch hands? You girls are all the same." It was the first time I answered back. You know you were the only one? I said, my voice trembling but determined. No one had ever touched me before. This only made him angrier. He threw me on the barn floor, in the middle of the dirty straw, and stormed out, slamming the door. I stayed there, crying, not knowing what would become of me. I knew the worst was yet to come. And it did. That same afternoon I was called to Mr. Davenport's office. I had never been in there before. It was a forbidden place for the maids. A large room with dark wood furniture, smelling of cigars and leather. Mr. Davenport was sitting behind a huge desk. Mrs. Eulalia standing beside him and leaning against the window with his arms crossed was Dr. Bow. "This is the whore, Mr. Davenport said as soon as I entered, without even looking at me properly. "So you decided to seduce my son, and now you say you're carrying my grandchild?" I opened my mouth to defend myself, but he slammed his hand on the desk, making me jump in fright. "Shut up. I don't want to hear your lies. Since you got here, I noticed you were too forward, eyeing the men, offering yourself. Mrs. Eulalia looked at me as if I were a disgusting insect that had entered her house. "Ungrateful serpent," she hissed. "We gave you a roof, food, work, and this is how you thank us? By trying to trap our son? Doctor?" Bo just watched, that same smirk on his face, knowing his word was worth more than mine. "I'll be clear," Mr. Davenport continued. "I don't want to see your face around here anymore. You have 10 minutes to pack your things and disappear from my property. If you spread this lying story that my son got you pregnant, I'll make sure to finish off the rest of your family. I still have contacts in Corsicana. It was a clear threat against my little brother. And don't think you're leaving here with a dime. Your family has owed mine for generations." I left the office with my head down, passing through the hallway where the other employees had gathered to listen. Everyone looked at the floor. No one looked at me. I caught a glimpse of my Aunt Clara, who was visiting that very day. She also looked away. The fear of Mr. Davenport was stronger than any blood tie. I gathered my few things in an old burlap sack. 2 sets of mended clothes, a broken comb, a ribbon that had been my mother's. I had nothing else. I left through the back door without saying goodbye to anyone. When I was almost at the ranch gate, I felt someone pull my arm. It was Miss Clementine, with a small bundle in her hands. "Take this, child," she whispered, looking around to see if anyone was watching. "A little flour, molasses, and a piece of jerky. It's not much, but it'll help you in the first few days." She also put a few coins in my hand. "I saved these secretly. Go to your aunt's house in the city. Maybe she'll help you." I left the Davenport ranch with a heart as heavy as lead. I had no plan, no future. Just this life growing inside me, and the certainty that the world was a cruel place for a girl alone. To top it all off, the sky, which had dawned blue, began to close in. Soon, a storm broke, one of those that turns the world upside down. I walked along the dirt road, which soon turned to mud, slipping and falling several times. The rain was so heavy I could barely see the path. In a short time, I was soaked to the bone, shivering with cold. My idea was to try to get to the city, to find Aunt Clara's house. Even though she had turned her back on me at the ranch, she was the only relative I had left. On that muddy road, with the rain washing my face and hiding my tears, I had nothing but the life growing in my womb. Today, I share this difficult story because I believe that no woman should have to walk through a storm alone. If this story has touched your heart, consider making a small contribution to the Wisdom of a Grandma channel. It's easy. Just click the thanks button that appears below the video. It's a coin with a heart. Choose any amount, from the price of a coffee to whatever your heart tells you. This money allows the team to travel across America, finding other women with stories buried in silence. They need gas, lodging, and equipment to give a voice to those who have lived in silence for decades. If you can't contribute, just watching until the end already makes me feel heard after so long. After hours of walking in the rain, I finally reached the small town. I was so weak I could barely stand. I found my Aunt Clara's house in a narrow alley near the church. When I knocked on the door, she opened it just a crack, and upon seeing me in that state, her eyes widened in fright. She looked both ways down the street before pulling me inside. "Quick, "Child, are you crazy coming here?" she whispered nervously. "If Mr. Davenport finds out I'm sheltering you, I'll lose my job, maybe even worse." But even with her fear, she didn't have the heart to send me away in that condition. She gave me dry clothes, a plate of hot food, and let me sleep on an old mattress on the kitchen floor. In the morning, before the sun even rose, she woke me up. She was agitated, nervous. "You can't stay here," she said, stuffing a bundle of food and a few coins into my hand. "My boss's son is a friend of Dr. Bowe's. If they find you here." She didn't need to finish the sentence. I got the message. "Where will I go, Auntie?" I asked, feeling the desperation return. She sighed deeply, as if making a difficult decision. "Do you know old Miss Alara? She lives in a cabin on the edge of the Davenport Ranch, on that land nobody wants because it's too rocky to plant. She was a slave on the ranch when she was young. After emancipation, she just stayed there. Mr. Davenport doesn't even remember she exists." I nodded. I had heard of old Miss Alara, but I had never seen her. They said she was a bit of a witch, that she knew how to cure illnesses with herbs and prayers. "Go there. She's helped other girls in similar situations. Tell her I sent you." I left my aunt's house with an even heavier heart. She had helped me, yes, but it was clear she was more afraid of Mr. Davenport than she loved me. I couldn't blame her. In that region, Mr. Davenport's word was law. Whoever defied him ended up without a job, without a home, sometimes even without a life. I started walking back, not on the main road, but on secondary trails as my aunt had instructed, a ghost returning to the lands that had cast me out. The rain had stopped, but the sky remained gray, threatening to return at any moment. I was so tired it felt like I was carrying lead in my feet. My empty stomach rumbled, but I saved the food my aunt had given me. I didn't know when I would get more. I walked all day, stopping only to rest occasionally and drink water from the streams. As the day wore on, I felt a weakness taking over me. My vision blurred, my legs wobbled. I knew it was because of the pregnancy, the hunger, the accumulated exhaustion from months of suffering. But I had to keep going. I had no choice. As the sun was setting, I finally spotted what must have been old Miss Alara's cabin. It was a simple structure of wattle and daub, with a thatched roof, in the middle of a rocky piece of land that no one bothered to cultivate. There was a small garden on the side with plants I didn't recognize and a few chickens scratching in the yard. I didn't even make it to the door. My strength gave out completely. I remember seeing the ground approaching too fast, feeling the thud of my body on the hard earth, and then darkness. When I opened my eyes again, I was lying on a mat on the dirt floor, covered with an old but clean blanket, my head resting on a straw pillow. I tried to get up, but a strong dizziness made me lie down again. That's when I saw her for the first time. Miss Alara was a small, skinny woman, her black skin so wrinkled it looked like a road map. Her white hair, like cotton, was tied in a bun on top of her head. She must have been around 78 years old, but she moved with surprising agility. Her eyes, however, were the most impressive. Dark, deep, they seemed to see right into your soul. "You're finally awake, child," she said, approaching with a clay bowl in her hand. "The baby's restless. Feel." She placed her hand on my belly, and I could feel a slight movement inside. The first time, I felt the baby move. Instead of joy, I felt dread. It was too real now. "The baby," Miss Alara said again, as if reading my thoughts, "is not to blame for how it was made." She helped me sit up and gave me the bowl to drink. It was a hot broth with the taste of yucca and herbs I didn't know. "It will give you strength," she explained. I drank it all, feeling the warmth return to my body, my stomach grateful after so long being empty. It was the first true kindness I had received in months. "Did your aunt send you?" she asked after I finished the broth. I nodded. I figured. She only sends people here when they're desperate. She smiled, showing that she was missing several teeth. "But that's right. Desperate is what you are." "Do you? Do you know what happened to me?" I asked, afraid of the answer. She let out a short, humorless laugh. "I know everything that happens on that ranch, child. From a distance. But I see. Dr. Bow has done this to others before you. 2 ran away. 1 killed herself. She spoke with a frankness that scared me. And Mr. Davenport always protects his son. Always. What am I going to do now? I asked, tears returning to my eyes. I have no one. I have nowhere to go. Miss Alara sat beside me on the mat with a tired sigh. You can stay here. No one comes to this forgotten corner. Mr. Davenport thinks this land is worthless. Little does he know it's where the best medicinal herbs grow. But what about the baby? I asked, running my hand over my still small belly. We'll find a way, she answered, with a certainty in her voice that gave me the first thread of hope since everything began. I've helped bring many children into this world. 1 more makes no difference. That night, lying on the mat in old Miss Alara's cabin, I felt for the first time that maybe, just maybe, I could survive all this. I still didn't know how. I still didn't see a clear future ahead. But at least I had a roof over my head, someone who didn't judge me, and the promise that I wouldn't have to face what was coming alone. What I didn't know yet was that that humble cabin on that piece of land that nobody wanted would be the beginning of the greatest transformation of my life. And that from that tragedy would be born not only a child, but the strength I never knew I had inside me. The first few months in Miss Alara's cabin were of slow recovery. My body, battered by so much suffering, needed to heal. My belly grew slowly, and with it, a mixed feeling that I couldn't quite explain. Fear of the future, anger at the past, and a hint of curiosity about this little life forming inside me. Miss Alara took care of me with a patience I had never seen. She made me eat even when I had no appetite, gave me herbal teas that helped to calm me, and ran her calloused hands over my forehead when I woke up screaming from a nightmare. The body heals faster than the soul, she would tell me, but one day, they both get better. At first, I didn't really believe it. It felt like there was a dark hole inside me that would never close. But little by little, day by day, I started to feel a strength returning. Not the same as before, but a different one, quieter, deeper. Miss Alara taught me about herbs as I got better. She knew every little plant that grew on that rocky terrain, knew what each leaf, each root, each flower was for. This one is for fever, she would explain, showing a small leafed plant. This other one calms the stomach. That one there. Be careful. A little bit cures. A lot kills. I listened to everything attentively, memorizing every detail, every method of preparation. It was knowledge too precious to be lost. In time, I started to help in the garden. Even with my growing belly, I could bend down to pull weeds, plant new seedlings, and water on days without rain. There was something healing in it. Feeling the earth between my fingers, seeing the plants grow under my care. It was as if every seed that sprouted told me that life goes on, despite everything. One rainy afternoon, when I was about 5 months pregnant, Miss Alara called me inside the cabin. She had a different expression on her face, like someone about to reveal a long-kept secret. "Come here, child," she said, dragging an old wooden chest that was hidden under a mat. I had never noticed it before. "It's time for you to see my treasure." She opened the chest with care, almost with reverence. Inside, wrapped in cotton cloth to protect them from moisture, were books. Not just 1 or 2, but several. A rare thing in those times, even more so for a woman like Miss Alara. "This one," she said, picking up a thin notebook with a slightly torn cover, "is the one I learned to read with when I was already a grown woman." She ran her wrinkled fingers over the cover with affection. It was a literacy primer. The youngest daughter of my old masters gave it to me in secret. She taught me the first letters. Then she picked up another, thicker one. "This is a book of home remedies. I wrote down everything I learned from my mother and grandmother." The third was a simple health manual, the kind the government distributed from time to time. "And this one?" she said, picking up the last one with even more care. "This one is special." It was a large, heavy book with a dark leather cover, faded by time. "Complete Manual of Practical Medicine," it said on the cover in gold letters, now almost gone. It was a gift from my last master before Mr. Davenport. He was a doctor. He got sick, and no one could cure him. Only I with my herbs. When he got better, he gave me this book as a gift. He said I had more of a gift for healing than many doctors out there. But do you know how to read all this? I asked, amazed. She let out a little laugh. I know a little, enough for what I need. But you? She looked at me with those eyes that seemed to see the future. You will learn everything, every word. And so our lessons began. First with the simple primer, learning letter by letter. I already knew a little. My mother had taught me the basics before she died, but it was very little. Miss Alara had the patience of a saint. She would sit with me after the work was done, by the light of a kerosene lamp, and guide me through the mysteries of letters and words. To my own surprise, I learned quickly. It was as if my mind was hungry for knowledge, devouring everything that came its way. In a few weeks, I was already reading the entire primer without stumbling. Soon, I moved on to the book of home remedies, then the health manual. The medical one was more difficult, full of complicated words and drawings of body parts I didn't even know the names of. But even that one, with time and persistence, I began to decipher. I've never seen anyone with such a good head. Miss Alara would say proudly, as if I were her own daughter, "You store everything you read like a treasure chest." And it was true. I only had to read or hear something once, and it was stored away. The names of the herbs, the methods for preparing remedies, the diseases and their symptoms, everything was organizing itself in my head like pieces of a puzzle falling into place. While my mind filled with new knowledge, my belly grew too. In the last few months, I could barely bend over to tend to the garden. The baby moved so much that sometimes it felt like it was dancing a jig in there. "It's a boy," Miss Alara would guarantee, placing her hand on my belly. "You can tell by the way you're carrying, all out in front." When the day came, it was harder than I imagined. The pain started at dawn, first faint, then increasing until it felt like it would tear me in half. Miss Alara sent for Zifa, a midwife from a nearby village whom she knew and trusted to keep a secret. The two of them worked with me all night. I screamed. I bit the cloth they had given me. I felt like I was going to die right there. "Push, child," Miss Alara encouraged. "Your son wants to see the world." After what felt like an eternity of pain, I finally heard the strong, angry, life-filled cry. "It's a boy," Zifa announced, cleaning the blood from the red, wrinkled little body. "And he's big and strong." When they placed him in my arms, everything changed inside me. He was no longer that man's son, the fruit of my disgrace. He was my son, my boy. I looked at that little red face, the swollen little eyes trying to open, and I felt a love so great it almost couldn't fit in my chest. "Anthony," I whispered. It was the name of Miss Alara's father, a good man who had died still a slave, without knowing freedom. That's when I noticed his left ear. It had a peculiar shape, as if the tip was folded in a specific way. I had seen that before. It was exactly like the ear of Mr. Davenport and his sons, a mark of the Davenport family that everyone knew. I felt a tightness in my heart. It was as if that man had left his mark on my son, an eternal reminder of what had happened. Miss Alara noticed it too, but said nothing. She only said, "It's just a piece of him. The rest is yours. And it will be you who raises this boy to be a different kind of man." At that moment, holding my son in my arms, I made a silent promise. "You will never know the hunger I knew. You will never feel the helplessness I felt. You will grow up strong, you will get an education, you will be somebody in life." The first months of motherhood were a challenge unlike anything I had ever faced. Anthony cried a lot, especially at night. My breasts became engorged, cracked, and hurt so much they gave me a fever. I didn't know how to hold him properly, how to bathe him without letting him slip, how to understand what each cry meant. Once again, it was Miss Alara who taught me, with the patience and wisdom of someone who had seen many lost new mothers like me. Slowly, I got the hang of it. Anthony grew, first smiling, then sitting up, crawling. The small cabin echoed with his laughter, his little shrieks of joy. It was as if all the darkness I had lived through was being illuminated by this little being who depended on me for everything. Miss Alara adored the boy. Even with her age weighing on her shoulders, she would get down to play with him, sing old lullabies, and tell stories of times that no longer existed. Anthony would look at her with fascination, as if she were some kind of fairy godmother from a storybook. And in a way, she was. She had saved us both with her kindness. It was almost a year after Anthony's birth that I noticed Miss Alara weakening. At first, it was small things. She tired more quickly in the garden, forgot where she had put things, coughed more in the morning. I tried to take care of her as she had taken care of me, with the same teas, the same remedies. But there were things that not even herbs could cure. Time, old age, a lifetime of hard work. One warm April afternoon, she called me over to the mat where she rested more and more often. "Abby," she said, her voice weak but clear, "my time is running out." I tried to protest, to say it was just tiredness, that she would soon be better. She smiled, that toothless smile that had lit up so many of my dark days. "Don't cry, child. I've had a long life. I've seen things you can't even imagine. Slavery, emancipation, so much change in this world. I'm tired. It's time to rest." She held my hand with surprising strength. "This cabin is yours now, and the boys—" "No one has ever claimed this piece of land. No one will. Take care of the garden, the herbs, the books. Everything I taught you, now use it to follow your path. Promise me." I promised, tears streaming down my face. That night, with Anthony sleeping in her lap, Miss Alara passed from this world, so quietly I didn't notice it at first. It looked like she had just fallen into a peaceful sleep after a long life. I buried her near the pecan tree she loved so much, where the shade was cool on summer afternoons. I cried for days, feeling as if I had lost a mother for the second time. But life had to go on. I had Anthony to raise, promises to keep. I decided to stay in the cabin. After all, as Miss Alara had said, nobody cared about that rocky piece of land. I continued to tend the garden, harvest the herbs, and study the books at night after Anthony was asleep. The 2 goats Miss Alara had left gave me milk. The chickens laid eggs. The garden provided vegetables. It wasn't much, but it was enough to not go hungry. I started doing occasional work on more distant farms, where no one knew me or my story. I washed clothes, cleaned houses, helped with the harvest. I took Anthony with me, tied to my back with a cloth when he was smaller, then walking by my side when he learned to walk. It was hard, exhausting, but every coin I earned, I saved carefully. First in a can buried in the cabin floor, then, when it grew, sewn into the lining of a pillow. It was on one of these farms that I met Mr. Juvenile. He had been an employee on the Davenport ranch for many years, knew Mr. Davenport and his family, but had left before I arrived. He was an elderly man of few words who cared for the animals with a special touch. When he learned I was living alone with a young boy, he started teaching me things about animal husbandry. How to tell if a goat is sick just by looking at it, how to get the hens to lay more eggs, how to cure hoof rot in cows. I never told him about my past on the Davenport ranch, but I think he suspected. Sometimes he would talk about Dr. Bow with a poorly disguised tone of contempt. That one always thought he was better than everyone else. Even as a boy, he was cruel to animals. Imagine with people, I stored this information away, like I stored everything, in my memory, to use when I needed it. In my spare time, when I wasn't working away from home or tending the garden, I devoted myself to the books. I studied obsessively by the light of the lamp after Anthony was asleep. The medical manual was my favorite. As difficult as it was, it fascinated me to know how the body worked, how diseases attacked, how remedies could cure. I combined this knowledge with what Miss Alara had taught me about herbs and started creating my own remedies. At first, I only used them on myself and Anthony when needed. A watercress and honey syrup for a cough, an infusion of lemon balm and mint for a stomachache, a poultice of castor oil leaves for the scrapes he was always getting from running and playing. Gradually, the news spread among the sparse neighbors of that isolated region. A woman came with her son, covered in ringworm. I prepared a St. John's wort ointment that cured him in a few days. An old man arrived, almost unable to breathe from so much phlegm in his chest. I made a syrup of guaco with black bee honey that gave him relief. A young woman with a fever that wouldn't break. A bath of eucalyptus leaves and a tea of cinchona bark did the trick. I didn't charge anything at first. I knew well what it was to be in need and have no money. I accepted what they could give, a handful of beans, fresh eggs, a chicken now and then. But over time, some people who were better off started insisting on paying with money. I didn't refuse. Every coin went into my secret fund, which grew slowly but steadily. The woman who knows things was what the people of the region started calling me. They came from far away, sometimes bringing the sick, asking for advice, seeking remedies. I wasn't a doctor. I never claimed to be. But in that corner of the world, where a trained doctor was rarer than rain in August, I did what I could with the knowledge I had gathered. Now I'm going to do a test to see who has real grit out there. I want to see who can hit the like button on this video after what I've just told. It's easy to turn your face away from the suffering of others. But to face the pain without looking away, that takes courage. You who have come this far, do you have that strength within you? Show that you do by hitting that thumbs up button as if to say, I'm here, I'm listening, and I'm not afraid of the truth, no matter how painful. Let's see how many brave souls we have here. Anthony grew up strong and smart. At 6, he was already helping me in the garden, knew the names of almost all the herbs, and knew what each was for. I had taught him to read using the same books Miss Alara had used with me. He learned even faster than I did. It seemed he sucked the letters off the page with those lively, curious eyes. Soon, he was reading everything he could find, even the scraps of old newspaper that sometimes wrapped a purchase. It was around this time that I met Mr. Jerome. He was a merchant who passed through the region from time to time with his wagon full of goods, fabric, kerosene, tools, things that couldn't be produced there. On one of his trips, he arrived with a high fever, shivering with chills. I prepared a strong tea of cinchona bark and applied cold water compresses until the fever subsided. He was so impressed with his quick recovery that on his next trip, he brought gifts. A new notebook for Anthony, a cut of fabric for me, and a proposal. He wanted to buy my remedies to sell in Waco, where he lived. There are a lot of people there who can't afford doctors and pharmacies, he explained. Your remedies are good and cheaper. I started preparing bottled remedies, ointments, syrups, and dried teas in larger quantities, which he took on each trip. The money I received in return was more than I could earn in months of working on the farms. For the first time, I began to think that maybe there was a different future for me and Anthony, beyond that isolated cabin. One afternoon, after delivering a large shipment of remedies, Mr. Jerome watched me as I explained what each was for. Miss Abby, he said suddenly, you should go to the city. With all that knowledge, you could work in the hospital. I laughed at the idea. In the hospital? Me, with no education, no diploma, and a son to raise? He didn't give up. My sister is a nun, a nurse there at St. Joseph's Hospital. I can talk to her. You'd start as a janitor, cleaning, but I'm sure they'd soon realize you understand more than many trained nurses. The idea kept buzzing in my head for days. Waco, a big city, with opportunities, a school for Anthony, a chance at a different life. But I was also afraid. Miss Alara's cabin was the only place I had felt safe since I left my mother's house. There, no one judged me. No one knew my past. What would it be like in a city with strangers, with curious eyes on a single woman with a fatherless son? Anthony decided for me. When I told him about Mr. Jerome's proposal, his eyes lit up like never before. We're going to live in the city, Mom? Where there are real schools and hospitals and stores? His excitement was contagious. I realized that as much as that isolated corner had been our refuge, it was also a prison. My son deserved more than that. He deserved all the opportunities the world could offer. On Mr. Jerome's next trip, I gave him my answer. He smiled, satisfied. I'll pick you two up in 2 weeks. That'll give you time to get everything organized. Those were days of hard work and mixed emotions. I packed our few belongings, gave the goats and chickens to the nearest neighbor, and harvested the last crop of herbs from the garden. The money I had saved over the years, my secret treasure, I wrapped in a cloth and hid it close to my body. It wasn't much, but it would be enough to start a new life. Saying goodbye to Miss Alara's cabin was harder than I imagined. As simple as it was, it had been our safe home for 7 years. Before leaving, I went to the pecan tree where she was buried. "Thank you for everything," I whispered. "I'll carry your knowledge and your kindness with me." I could almost hear her answering, "Go, child. Your destiny is greater than this piece of ground." Anthony could barely contain his excitement when Mr. Jerome arrived with the wagon to pick us up. The boy had never been beyond the neighboring farms, and now he was embarking on an adventure into the unknown. He looked at everything along the way with wide, amazed eyes, the distant hills, the larger farms, and finally, after a full day of travel, the first houses of the city. Waco seemed like another world to those of us who only knew the isolated countryside. Paved streets, houses side by side, the bustle of people and cars, stores with colorful windows. Anthony didn't know where to look first. He pointed at everything, asked 1,000 questions that I didn't know the answers to either. Mr. Jerome took us straight to St. Joseph's Hospital, an imposing white building with a large cross on the front. There I met Sister Conception, his sister, a serious woman of about 50, dressed in the black and white habit of the nuns, with a face that seemed carved in stone but kind eyes that resembled her brother's. The interview was easier than I feared. Sister Conception asked few questions about my past, where I had learned about remedies, if I could read and write, if I had experience with the sick. When I mentioned Miss Alara's books, especially the medical manual, she seemed impressed. She asked me to identify some herbs she had in a box, to explain what they were for. Then she wanted to know how I would treat certain symptoms. "Your brother didn't exaggerate," she said finally. "You really understand the subject." She explained that she could hire me as a cleaning assistant. It was the only position available for someone without a formal education. "But," she added with a knowing look, "nothing prevents you from observing and learning during your breaks. We always need people who understand how to care for others." And so I began my new life in Waco. Mr. Jerome helped us find a small room to rent in the back of a widow's house. It was small but clean, with space for 2 narrow beds, a small stove, and a table. Anthony was enrolled in the nearest public school, the first in the family to have a formal education. At the hospital, I worked hard, scrubbing floors, washing bed linens, cleaning the wards. But as Sister Conception had promised, I could observe the procedures during my breaks. Sometimes, I even helped with simple things, like making compresses or preparing the beds. I absorbed everything like a sponge, comparing what I saw with what I had learned in the books and in practice with Miss Alara. It was after about 3 months of working there that I saw him. I was cleaning the hallway of the consulting rooms when a door opened and he walked out, Dr. Bo Davenport. Older, with threads of white hair at his temples, but unmistakable. My blood ran cold, my heart pounded like a drum. I quickly turned my back, scrubbing the floor with unnecessary force, praying he wouldn't recognize me. He didn't. He walked past me without a glance, talking to another doctor. To him, I was just another invisible cleaning lady, one of the many who cleaned up the mess he left behind. The years and suffering had changed my appearance. Thinner, older than my age, my skin weathered by the sun, my hair dull. I was no longer the girl from the barn. In the following days, I stayed alert, observing from a distance. I found out that he was one of the most respected doctors in the hospital, with a private practice in the city's upscale area. But there were whispers in the corridors, conversations among the nurses that I picked up while cleaning, pretending not to listen. "Dr. Bo isn't well," one would say. "Did you see how his hand shakes when he gives an injection?" "It's the disease," another would reply. "He caught that plague years ago. Didn't treat it properly out of shame. Now it's advanced." Little by little, piecing together these snippets of conversation, I understood. Advanced, stage syphilis, with irreversible neurological damage. I also learned that his arranged marriage to the daughter of another prominent landowner was on the rocks. The wife was threatening to go back to her father's house, humiliated by her husband's disease, which everyone knew how it had been contracted. And what's more, the Davenport family was facing serious financial problems since the old man's death. The lands that once seemed infinite were being sold off piece by piece to pay debts. That night, lying in the narrow bed of our little room, with Anthony sleeping in the bed beside me, I stared at the ceiling, thinking about the irony of life. The man who had destroyed my youth, who had treated me as less than human, was now slowly wasting away, losing everything he valued: health, reputation, marriage, fortune. I felt no joy, no pity, just a cold certainty growing inside me. The wheel of life had begun to turn, and this time, it was turning in my favor. After learning about Dr. Bo's situation, I started paying special attention to everything related to him at the hospital. It wasn't revenge, not at first. It was more of a curiosity mixed with a warning that seemed to sound inside me, as if fate had placed me there, in the same place as him, for a reason greater than I yet understood. I began to observe his schedule from afar, his routes through the hospital, who spoke to him, who avoided him. I noticed he always arrived at 8 in the morning, never earlier, never later. He left for lunch at noon, came back at 1:30, and finished his workday at 6, except on Tuesdays, when he stayed later for special cases. On the days he trembled more, he prescribed fewer injections, more pills. When the pain in his joints flared up, he became irritable with the nurses, yelling over the smallest things. It was during this quiet observation that I met Margaret. She had been a nurse for over 15 years, specializing in venereal diseases not by choice, but because no one else wanted the job. A woman in her 40s, her hair always in a tight bun, with eyes that seemed to have seen everything this life has to offer. She was the one who cared for the syphilis patients, including Dr. Bo when he needed more intensive treatment. At first, we barely exchanged words. I would clean the treatment room, she would do her job. But one day, I accidentally spilled a bucket of water right as she was about to pass. Instead of yelling at me, as many nurses would have, she just laughed and helped me dry the floor. "Happens to the best of us," she said with a tired smile. After that, we started talking from time to time. Margaret wasn't one for much talk, but when she spoke, it had substance. She told me about the patients, without naming names, of course. About how many men caught diseases in the brothels and then blamed their wives. How some reached advanced stages because they were too ashamed to seek treatment earlier. How others took the first medicine and thought they were cured, abandoning the rest of the treatment. Our friendship grew slowly. I would bring her lemon balm tea, which helped calm her down after a difficult day. She would save me leftover snacks from the nurses' meetings. When Anthony was sick and couldn't go to school, she would sometimes let him stay in an empty room, drawing quietly until I finished my shift. After a few months like this, we began to exchange more personal confidences. She told me she was a widow. Her husband had died in the war without leaving any children. She lived alone in a small room similar to mine, and sometimes the loneliness was so heavy it ached in her chest. It was then, on an impulse I didn't even understand myself, that I told her part of my story. I didn't say everything at once, of course. First, I just mentioned I was a single mother, that my son's father had been a man of position who had taken advantage of me when I was young. Then, on another day, I told her about being kicked off the ranch, about Miss Alara, about how I had learned about herbs and remedies. With each conversation, I revealed a little more, testing her reaction, seeing how far I could trust her. Margaret listened to everything without judgment, just nodding her head from time to time as if to say, "That doesn't surprise me." One day, when we had enough trust in each other, I asked her directly about Dr. Bo. "What about him?" she asked suspiciously. "I think I knew him from before," I replied, my heart beating fast. "From the region where I came from." She looked at me for a while, as if deciding whether or not to tell a secret. "The doctor is not well," she said finally. "He's very sick, more than he lets others see." Gradually, Margaret confirmed what I already suspected. Dr. Bo had contracted syphilis years ago, probably from one of the many women he slept with in the capital. At first, he hid the symptoms out of shame, only seeking treatment when it was no longer possible to hide. But it was too late. The disease had spread, affecting his nervous system. "It's only a matter of time," she said one afternoon as we drank coffee hidden in the supply room. "The tremors will get worse. Then will come paralysis, memory problems, maybe even madness. No one escapes when it reaches this stage. It was around this same time that I met Mr. Thomas. He wasn't a doctor, actually, but a lawyer. Everyone at the hospital called him Doctor, out of respect. He came almost every day to visit his wife, Mrs. Helena, who suffered from a heart condition. A man in his 50s, always in a well-pressed suit, even in the Texas heat, a leather briefcase under his arm, small glasses that were always slipping down his nose. Our first meeting was by chance. I was cleaning the hallway near Mrs. Helena's room when he tripped over a bucket I had left there. He almost fell, saving himself just in time. Instead of yelling, as I expected, he laughed at his own clumsiness. "If I break my leg, at least I'm already in the right place," he joked. After that, he always greeted me when he saw me. Unlike many wealthy people, he treated everyone with the same respect, doctors, nurses, or janitors. One day, he saw me reading a medical book during my break. It was one I had managed to borrow from the hospital library. Instead of finding it strange, he showed genuine interest. "Do you like medicine?" he asked. "I like to learn," I replied, a little embarrassed. This led to a long conversation about education, about how many capable people didn't have opportunities in this country. He told me he had come from a poor family, too. He had only studied because a priest in his town had insisted and arranged a scholarship. The conversations with Mr. Thomas became more frequent. He always arrived early to visit his wife and would spend a little time talking to me before going into the room. We talked about everything: politics, medicine, justice, education. He seemed impressed with my knowledge of natural remedies and even asked for tips for the insomnia he suffered from. One day, when the trust was well established, I told him part of my story too. Unlike Margaret, who listened more with her heart, Mr. Thomas listened with his lawyer's mind, attentive to details, legal implications, possibilities. When I mentioned the name Beau Davenport, his eyes widened behind his glasses. "I know the family," he said, adjusting his glasses nervously. "I've represented clients against them a few times. The old man was a tyrant. The sons aren't much better." He hesitated, as if weighing his words. "If what you're telling me is true, and I have no reason to doubt it, your son would have a legal right to a share of the Davenport inheritance." The idea had never occurred to me before. I didn't want money from the Davenports. I wanted nothing from that family. But Mr. Thomas opened my eyes to a possibility I hadn't considered. Anthony deserved recognition, not for the material value, but for the moral principle. And what's more, the Davenports' financial situation, which was already bad, could worsen if an unexpected heir appeared, claiming part of the fortune. "I don't want a fortune," I explained. "I just want a future for my son, and maybe a little piece of land to call my own." It was then that the plan began to form in my mind. It wasn't revenge, at least not the bloody kind people usually think of. It was more like justice, a course correction that fate had left in my hands. Margaret and Mr. Thomas became my confidants, and, without knowing it at first, my accomplices. She kept me informed about Beau's health, about his good days and bad. He advised me on legal matters, on how I could prove Anthony's paternity without a blood test, which at the time was rare and expensive. The answer came from Anthony himself, the mark on his ear. That peculiar fold at the tip of his left ear that I had noticed the day he was born. It was a known characteristic of the Davenport family. The old man himself had it, all his children had it, and they said it had been passed down for generations. It was so specific that people in the region joked, "If you've got the Davenport ear, you've got Davenport blood." I carefully studied Beau's routine at the hospital. I knew that on Tuesdays he stayed later and was always the last to leave the consulting wing. I also knew that on that day, the pain in his joints usually worsened, leaving him more vulnerable. And I knew, above all, that his greatest fear was not of the disease itself, but of the scandal it would cause if the severity of his condition became known to local society. On a Tuesday in April, I waited for everyone to leave the consulting wing. I had asked Margaret to discreetly bring Anthony nearby, leaving him in an empty waiting room with the excuse that I would soon come to get him. I took a deep breath, straightened my uniform, and knocked on the door of the office where I knew Bo still was. "Come in," the familiar voice replied, even after so many years. I opened the door slowly, entered, and closed it behind me. He was sitting at the desk, his head down, making notes in a chart. He didn't even look up immediately. "I'm done here, you can clean," he said, thinking I was just the usual janitor. "Is the milk still warm, doctor?" I asked, my voice firmer than I expected. He jerked his head up, his eyes wide with shock. It took him a few seconds to analyze my face, trying to remember where he had seen me before. I saw the exact moment the memory returned. His face paled, his mouth fell slightly open, the pen dropped from his trembling hand. "You," he stammered. "The girl from the barn." I nodded. "No, it's not possible. How long has it been? 10 years? 8, I corrected. 8 years since you repeatedly raped me in your father's barn, got me pregnant, and then accused me of sleeping with the ranch hands. 8 years since I was thrown out like a mangy dog, without money, without references, with only the clothes on my back and a baby in my belly." He stood up, leaning on the desk, already recovering some of his arrogance. "Who let this crazy woman in here? I don't know what you're talking about. You've held a grudge for so long over a fantasy. If someone got you pregnant, that's your problem, not mine." That's when I opened the door and motioned. Anthony entered shyly, looking curiously at this man he had never seen before. I put my hand on my son's shoulder and said, "Dr. Bo, this is Anthony, my son." "Your son?" Bo gave a forced, nervous laugh. "Absurd. Any kid could be your son. That doesn't prove anything." I then asked Anthony to turn his head, showing his left ear. "Look closely, doctor. The Davenport mark. The same one you have. The same one your father had." I saw his eyes widen again, this time with a different kind of fear. I knew he was seeing the peculiar fold, exactly like his. Living proof of the blood that ran in the boy's veins. "That still doesn't mean," he began, but I cut him off. "Nurse Margaret knows your medical condition in detail. She has access to your charts, your medications. She knows about the palliative care you receive. She also knows that the disease has already affected your nervous system, that it's only a matter of time." "Get out!" he yelled, slamming the table with force, making Anthony flinch and hide behind me. "What do you want? Money? Is that it? How much?" I motioned for Anthony to wait outside. When the door closed, I faced that man. The same eyes that once filled me with terror now showed fear themselves. "I don't want your money, Dr. Bo. I only want 3 things." I counted them on my fingers. First, the small plot of land at the back of the old ranch, where Miss Alara's cabin was. Second, a guaranteed education for Anthony. Tuition at the best school until he completes his studies. Third, a document recognizing the legal sale of the land for a symbolic value, not as a donation. He looked at me, incredulous. "That's it? A piece of land that's worthless and school for the boy?" "That's it," I confirmed. "I don't want your name. I don't want your money beyond the boy's education. I don't want anything else from you. I just want a place that is mine by right, and the chance to give a better future to my son, to our son." The initial resistance was strong, as expected. First came complete denial, then empty threats. "I'll sue you for defamation. I'll make you lose your job. No one will believe you." I responded to everything calmly, reminding him of the nurse who knew his condition, of the visible symptoms of the disease that any doctor could confirm, of the undeniable mark on the boy's ear. Finally, the bargaining. "I can give you money, much more than that useless piece of land is worth." I refused. "I can get you a better job in another city." I refused again. He didn't understand that it wasn't about money or immediate advantage. It was about dignity, about building something with my own hands, about a future I could control myself. In the midst of this tense negotiation, the door opened without warning. It was Mr. Thomas, as we had arranged. "Sorry for the delay," he said, as if he had been expected. In the briefcase he carried, he had all the documents already prepared: the land transfer, the commitment to Anthony's education, all drafted in legal language that Bo couldn't escape. "Mr. Thomas?" Bo asked, confused. "What are you doing here?" "I am representing the interests of Miss Abigail and the minor, Anthony," he replied calmly, adjusting his glasses. "I believe you have already discussed the terms of the agreement." Bo looked from one to the other, realizing he had been cornered. His hands were shaking visibly now, whether from the disease or nerves. "This is a trap," he murmured. "No, doctor," I corrected. "It's justice." The signing of the documents happened right there, in that room, with his hands shaking so much that his signature was barely recognizable. Mr. Thomas witnessed everything, ensuring that every paper was signed correctly. When we finished, Bo seemed to have aged 10 years in an hour. "Satisfied now?" he asked bitterly. "Got what you wanted?" "No, doctor. I got what was mine by right. And less than what you owe me." I took the documents and left the room, finding Anthony in the hallway, nervous but curious. "Who was that man, Mom?" he asked as we walked out of the hospital. "Someone who owed us something," I replied. "And he finally paid." In that room, seeing that man who once treated me as less than human, trembling and cornered, I confess I felt something akin to pleasure. I didn't ask for easy money. I didn't seek bloody revenge. I demanded only what would allow me to build something with my own hands and a future for my son. But I often wonder, was I cruel to use his illness as a weapon? Should I have just moved on, forgetting the past? What would you have done in my place, with a child to raise and the chance to turn the tables in your hands? Tell me in the comments what you think of the choice I made. 2 weeks after the documents were signed, we left our little room in the city and returned to the countryside. Miss Alara's cabin was still there, a little more deteriorated by time, but standing. The land around it, that same rocky piece of land that Mr. Davenport thought was worthless, was now officially mine. I had the papers to prove it. Anthony found it strange at first. He was used to the city, the school, his new friends, but he soon adapted, especially when I explained that he would continue his studies, now in a better school. "And are we going to raise cows, Mom? Real ones?" he asked excitedly when I told him my plans. The decision to start a dairy farm didn't come out of nowhere. I had experience since childhood, helping with the neighbors' cows, then at the Davenport Ranch, and finally with Miss Alara's goats. I knew the animals, knew how to care for them, how to milk them, how to recognize diseases, and most importantly, I knew that milk was something everyone needed, every day. My first step was to find Mr. Juvenal, who still worked on a nearby farm. When he heard about my plans, he smiled in his quiet but satisfied way. "I knew you'd be back, Miss Abby, and I knew you'd do something good with your life." He offered to help me in his spare time, to teach me what I didn't yet know about raising cattle on a larger scale. I continued working at the hospital, making the commute back and forth every day. Thanks to Sister Conception, I was promoted from janitor to nursing assistant, still without formal training, but with recognition of my practical knowledge. The better salary helped support our new beginning. In my spare time, I studied obsessively about dairy farming. I would go to the public library in the city and check out everything I could find on the subject. Technical books, agricultural magazines, government manuals. I read everything by the light of a lamp after Anthony was asleep. With a loan I managed to get through Mr. Thomas, who offered to be my guarantor. I bought my first 2 dairy cows. They weren't the best, one already a bit old, the other a bit thin, but they were what I could afford. Mr. Juvenal helped me choose them, ensuring they were at least healthy and could still produce milk for a long time. My routine at that time was enough to kill anyone less determined. I woke up at 4 a.m., milked the cows, prepared the milk, took Anthony to the private school, a requirement that Bo dutifully fulfilled, perhaps for fear that I would show up at his office again. I went to the hospital, worked all day, came back, took care of the animals, the garden I had replanted, prepared food, helped Anthony with his homework, and still found the energy to study more about cattle and milk before collapsing exhausted into bed. The first bottles of milk I sold were to the immediate neighborhood. I filled reused glass bottles, put them in a large basket, and went door to door offering them. At first, people bought more out of pity or curiosity than anything else. The woman who came back was what they called me. Some vaguely knew my story, others made up their own versions. I didn't care about the gossip, only about the quality of what I sold. Soon, Miss Abby's milk gained a reputation for being purer, creamier, and more flavorful than the others. I was meticulous about cleanliness, the care of the cows, the right time to milk. While other producers mixed water into the milk to make it go further, I guaranteed total purity. While some left their animals in precarious conditions, I kept my small herd, which soon grew to 4, then 6 cows, clean, well-fed, and healthy. By the early 1960s, my small operation was becoming known. Around 1962, I took a chance and participated in the local agricultural fair. I brought my milk, my homemade cottage cheese, the butter I had learned to make. I didn't expect anything more than perhaps selling a little more than usual. To my surprise, I won an honorable mention for the purest milk in the region. The framed certificate was the first thing I hung on the wall of the renovated cabin, with pride. Every cent I earned beyond what was necessary to survive was reinvested in the business. Another cow here, a better piece of equipment there, a renovation of the makeshift corral. Slowly, that rocky piece of land that nobody wanted was transformed. The garden grew, fences were erected. A small but decent barn replaced the makeshift shed. While my life slowly flourished, Bo's continued its downward spiral. The marriage ended for good when rumors about his illness spread through local society. The wife returned to her father's house, taking their 2 young children with her. His health worsened with each passing month. The tremors became so severe that he had to abandon his medical practice, limiting himself to consultations where he only needed to talk and prescribe. The family farm, without the firm administration of the old man, sank into debt. Bo's brothers, who never had a head for business, sold off pieces of the land to maintain the lifestyle they thought they deserved. The main house, which once seemed like a palace to me, began to show signs of decay, peeling paint, a neglected garden, a roof in need of repair. At my insistence, Anthony visited Bo from time to time. He didn't know he was his father. I introduced him only as a sick man who had helped us in the past. I thought it was important for him to see what alcohol and a dissolute life could do to a person. Get to know him, I would tell my son. Not to forgive him or admire him, but to never become like him. Looking back today, I think maybe I was too harsh. But at that time, every time I saw my son coming home from private school with books under his arm and a bright future ahead of him, I remembered the scared girl in the barn, the nights of terror, the rain on the road after being thrown out, and I knew I had done what needed to be done. Time went on, the small business grew, and I began to understand what Miss Alara meant when she said that time heals all wounds. The pain never completely disappeared. Some wounds leave scars for the rest of your life, but I learned to live with it, to transform what was once weakness into strength. And above all, I learned that the best revenge is not to destroy your enemy, but to build your own happiness in spite of him. The years passed, and the small dairy operation I started with 2 skinny cows grew more than anyone could have imagined. When the 1970s arrived, the country was experiencing what they called an economic miracle. In the blink of an eye, the country changed. New highways cut through the countryside. Industries arrived in the interior. Government money for anyone who wanted to expand their business in the rural sector. Many people in the region turned up their noses at these new things. The government promises a lot, delivers little, said the older farmers, clinging to the old ways of doing things. But I, who had never had anything to lose, saw a unique opportunity. While others rested in the shade of the mango trees, I went in search of information. I discovered that the SBA, a government agency, had special credit lines for small, rural producers, lower interest rates than normal, long repayment terms, and a grace period of years before starting to pay back. But you had to present a project, a business plan, growth, forecasts, things that no one there knew how to do, no one except me. All those years of obsessive studying, of reading everything I could find about administration and business, finally paid off. With the help of Mr. Thomas, who remained my friend and advisor, I put together a detailed project for the expansion of my small farm, which I now proudly called Abigail's Meadow Creamery. I was the first person in the region to get an SBA loan. I still remember the look on the bank employees' faces when I arrived, a woman alone with a ream of paper under her arm. At first, they thought I was there on behalf of a husband or father. When they understood that the business was mine, their eyebrows rose so high they almost touched their hair. But the project was too good to deny. With the loan money, I completely transformed Abigail's Meadow Creamery. I built a modern barn with a proper floor and a drainage system that made cleaning easier. I installed mechanical milking equipment that saved time and ensured better hygiene. I bought purebred bulls to improve the genetics of my herd, which was no longer small. It had reached 30 dairy cows, each producing twice as much as the common ones in the region because of the special care they received. Anthony had graduated in law from the University of Texas at Austin. He was the first in the family to have a university degree. On graduation day, sitting in the audience, watching my son receive his diploma, I cried like a child. I thought of the girl in the barn, of the pregnant girl thrown out in the rain, and I could hardly believe where we had come. I thought he would want to stay in Austin, open an office, pursue a career far away, but he surprised me by coming home. "Mom," he said, "I studied law so I could help you grow even more. The future of America is in the countryside, and Abigail's Meadow Creamery is going to be the best in the region." And so it was. His knowledge of law, contracts, and negotiation, combined with my practical experience and technical knowledge, formed an unbeatable team. It wasn't easy, of course. Being a female entrepreneur in a world dominated by men never is. There were farmers who refused to negotiate with me. They would only talk to Anthony. Banks that asked for a male responsible party's signature on documents, even though the business was registered in my name. Suppliers who tried to cheat me on prices, thinking I didn't understand numbers. But I had built a strong network over the years. Margaret, who had left the hospital and now helped me with the farm's administration, Mr. Thomas, who, even retired from law, continued to advise me on legal matters, Mr. Juvenile, who, though old, still showed up to give his opinion on the cattle, and especially other women in the region who, inspired by my example, were starting their own businesses. Small clothing stores, inns for travelers, homemade candy production. We supported each other, exchanged tips, and created a circle of mutual protection. The creamery I built on the farm was the big leap. Instead of just selling raw milk, I started producing cheese, butter, yogurt, and cream cheese products that lasted longer, traveled better, and brought in more profit. Soon, I had my own trucks taking Abigail's Meadow Creamery products not only to Waco but also to Dallas, Houston, and even San Antonio. While Abigail's Meadow Creamery grew strong, the Davenport Ranch withered like a plant without water. The mismanagement of Mr. Davenport's sons, combined with accumulated debts and Beau's illness, eroded what had once been an empire. One by one, the pieces of land were auctioned off to pay creditors. And who was there at every auction, with money in hand and expansion plans in mind? Me. Piece by piece, I bought the lands that had once belonged to the family that had humiliated and expelled me. It wasn't revenge, it was business. Those lands were good, they just needed someone who knew how to work them. Beau, who by this time was completely incapacitated by the disease, was admitted to a nursing home on the outskirts of the city. He couldn't afford anything better. The family fortune had evaporated. His brothers could barely take care of themselves. It was Anthony who, knowing the situation, decided to pay a monthly pension for the old man. "It's not out of affection," he explained to me. "It's because no human being deserves to die abandoned, not even him." One hot summer day, almost 30 years after that fateful morning in the barn, I went to visit Beau at the nursing home. I'm not sure what led me there. Curiosity, perhaps, or the need to close a circle that had marked my life so profoundly. He was in a simple bed, in a room he shared with 2 other elderly men. The body that was once strong and threatening was now skin and bones. His face, marked by deep wrinkles and spots from the disease, his eyes sunken in their sockets, had lost their arrogant gleam. I don't know if he recognized me immediately. The disease had already affected his memory, according to the nurses. "Dr. Beau," I called, stopping by the bed. He turned his head slowly, his eyes trying to focus. A flash of recognition passed through them. Abby, he stammered, his voice weak and hoarse. Yes, it's me, I replied, pulling up a chair to sit. I came to see how you are. He closed his eyes for a moment, as if gathering strength. When he spoke, the words came out with difficulty. You got everything you wanted. My lands, my family, everything is gone. I didn't come to throw that in your face, I replied sincerely. What happened to your family was not my doing. It was the result of the choices you all made for generations. We were silent for a while. The only sound was the old fan spinning on the ceiling, circulating the hot air. Finally, he spoke again. Forgive me. The words sounded strange coming from that mouth, as if it had never been made to ask for forgiveness. For what I did to you. I was young, arrogant. I didn't feel the relief or satisfaction I might have expected from that request. Just an old weariness, like someone finally setting down a heavy load they've carried for a long time. I didn't come for your repentance, I replied, taking a glass bottle from my bag. I came to bring you fresh milk, the purest in the region, produced on the lands that were once yours. I placed the bottle on the small table next to the bed and stood up to leave. He stopped me with a trembling hand on my arm. Your son, Anthony, does he know? The question contained genuine fear. That I am? He knows. I confirmed. He knows everything. It was his choice to pay your pension here. It was his choice to buy your family's land when it went to auction. And it was his choice to never come confront you or demand anything. I gently removed his hand from my arm. He is a better man than any of us. I left that room feeling that a circle had closed. It wasn't forgiveness. Some things are beyond forgiveness. It was more a recognition that life has its own way of delivering justice. Sometimes slow, sometimes unpredictable, but always arriving in the end. Bo died a few months after that visit. Anthony went to the funeral. I did not. Not out of anger or resentment, but because that chapter was already closed for me. That afternoon in the nursing home, I had fulfilled the silent promise I made to Miss Alara so many years before, that her knowledge and kindness would not be forgotten. The land where her cabin stood was now the heart of Abigail's Meadow Creamery, and the pecan tree where she was buried had grown strong and leafy, providing shade for the bench where I liked to sit on Sunday afternoons. My life took a turn I could never have imagined on that rainy morning when I left the Davenport Ranch with only the clothes on my back. At 40, when Anthony was already grown and the farm was prospering, I met Peter, a widower who had come to work as an accountant in our business. Unlike any man I had known before, he respected me deeply, admired my independence, and never tried to take control of what I had built. After 2 years of dating, complete with Sunday strolls and flower suie, got married in a simple ceremony in the farm's backyard. I never expected to find love at that stage of my life, but it arrived, calm and secure, like the sunset after a day's work. Peter brought 2 daughters from his first marriage, whom I embraced as my own. He, in turn, loved Anthony like the son he never had. The years passed, the family grew. Anthony married Maria, the daughter of a university professor, and they had 3 children, my grandchildren, who grew up running free on the farm as their father never could at their age. They all went to good schools, went to college. The oldest graduated in agronomy and today helps manage the farm. The middle one became a doctor and works in the same hospital where I was once a janitor. The youngest, my darling granddaughter, is a lawyer specializing in women's rights. I met my Aunt Clara again by chance at a farmer's market in Dallas. She was very old, retired from her job as a cook, living with a daughter. When she saw me, now a well-known businesswoman, owner of the busiest stall at the market, she could hardly believe it. She cried, hugged me, and asked for forgiveness for not having defended me on that terrible day at the ranch. I held no grudge. I knew well the power that fear has over people. I began to help her financially, ensuring a dignified end of life for the only relative I had left. With the growth of the farm, I was able to realize an old dream, to create a scholarship program for young people in the region. I focused especially on girls from poor families who, without help, would never have the chance to study beyond the basics. I also set up a small school on the farm itself, where we taught literacy to adult women domestic workers, farm laborers, housewives who never had the opportunity to learn to read and write. My youngest granddaughter, Anna Teresa, makes me especially proud. She started out working as a maid to pay for veterinary school, even though I insisted I could pay for everything. "Grandma," she told me, "I want to understand firsthand what you went through. Only then will I truly value it." Today, she is the head veterinarian of the farm, takes care of the prize-winning herd we've raised, and teaches at the university in her spare time. Even having gotten where I am, I carry scars that will never completely heal. Even today, at 90, I have insomnia in the early morning, especially at the hour when I was forced to go to the barn. I catch myself looking at the clock at 4 a.m., my body tense, my heart racing, as if I'm still waiting to hear those footsteps approaching. I have also never been able to easily trust men in positions of power. When I have to negotiate with bankers, politicians, wealthy farmers, I always take someone with me, even knowing I can handle the situation alone. It's a remnant of that old fear, a reflex that not even all the therapy I've had in recent years has managed to completely erase. The nightmares have decreased over time, but they still appear now and then. I wake up sweating, screaming softly so as not to wake anyone, reliving those moments in the barn as if they happened yesterday. Peter learned to deal with it. He holds me without saying anything, makes me a chamomile tea. I learned from Miss Alara that it calms the nerves and stays by my side until I fall back asleep. I've created a ritual that helps me deal with these scars. Every night before bed, I drink a cup of warm milk. The same milk that was once used to torment me now comforts me. It's my way of saying that it no longer has power over me, that I have transformed the symbol of my suffering into the symbol of my strength. Some wounds never fully close. We learn to live with them, to incorporate them into our story, to use them as a reminder of what we have overcome. As I always tell my grandchildren when they complain about some difficulty, a scar is just a reminder that you were stronger than whatever tried to bring you down. Throughout this long journey we call life, I've learned a few things that might be worth sharing. First, time is the silent ally of those with patience and determination. The Davenports thought they had destroyed me that rainy morning, but they didn't see that they had planted the seed of their own destruction. It took years, but time brought the harvest. Second, knowledge is the only wealth no one can take from you. They can take your house, your land, your money, but what you have learned, whether in books or in life, stays with you forever. That's how I transformed my life, one book at a time, one lesson at a time. Third, and perhaps most importantly, the best revenge is not to destroy your enemy, but to build something he could never imagine you were capable of. If I had spent my energy just hating the Davenports, feeding the desire to see them suffer, I would have wasted my life. Instead, I used that energy to build something bigger and better than they ever dreamed of. As I often tell the young people in the region, milk sours quickly, but the lessons of suffering last a lifetime. It's not what happens to you that defines who you are, but how you respond to it. And a woman with a plan is more powerful than a man with an empire. My story is not unique. There are thousands of women out there who have turned adversity into a weapon, who have turned their salty tears into the very foundation of their own empires. This Grandparents' Memories channel is our voice. We aren't here to dwell on the past. We are here to prove that the future isn't something you wait for, it's something you seize with your own hands and mind. Will you hate, or will you create? Will you drown in sorrow, or will you forge it into power? The choice is yours. Hit like to spread this strength. Subscribe so you never forget your own worth, and leave a comment to let me know. How will you begin to build your own empire?